Hello, Keith Jones.
Hi, Rick. How you doing?
I'm good, buddy. How are you?
Good, man. It's been about 5 or 6 weeks since I last saw you. It's been a while.
I know.
I've missed you.
I miss you too, man. You know, the thing that's cool about not being together all the time, though, is you have a chance to find what your blockages are in your life and obstacles and try to work on them a little bit, and you bring them back to the podcast.
Yes.
And get information from the other guy that's helpful.
Right.
Which is why I'm excited about today's topic.
I am too. I'm very excited. Today's topic is titled Acceptance. It begins with acceptance. So you want to talk a little bit about your thoughts on that?
Sure. One of the things I think that we all make the mistake of doing is confusing wanting to improve, for example, and sometimes requires changing habits, changing outlooks. And then also failing to understand that some things must be accepted because they can't be changed. You know, it's the old idea that you can work as hard as you can to change things you can, and you know, to accept the things you can't, and be wise to know what the differences are. But when you accept, two things happen, I think. One is there's a sense of not striving. There's a sense of being okay in the present moment, being okay with who you are, what the circumstance is. And the second thing that I think happens is that creates a space, that opens up an opportunity for you to look and see what direction you want to go from there. What do you think?
I totally agree with you. It creates an opening once you accept. And from that opening are infinite possibilities. And I think the younger me, and when I say younger, just only a few years ago, that opening for me meant other possibilities to pursue some kind of goal or some kind of objective. And it means something much more to me now. It means it opens a possibility for peace.
So are there any things that you struggle with where you have a difficult time accepting them, and how do you end up dealing with them?
There is a lot of examples of it. I mean, even now that I've been kind of really committed to practicing acceptance over the last 3.5 years, it's still days where something will happen and I find myself with my ego reacting and not really wanting to accept it. And then that's where I come back to my acceptance for me is no longer about getting somewhere, striving, achieving, having a certain outcome. Acceptance for me is with this moment, fully allow it to be exactly as it is. And as soon as I do that, it's peace. And so to answer your question directly, an example would be learning that when I was choosing to go back to school to pursue a degree, that I needed a few more classes under my belt to qualify for scholarships. And I was like, my GPA, I should be able to get a scholarship with how I ended school the first time. And accepting that these are the rules. And there was some like, it shouldn't be this way. Look at my track record, look at this, look at that. And this is the way it is. You know, if there's some action to take, I'll take the action, which I did. I called the financial aid office, I talked to the advisor, and they all had the same response. So at that point, the only action to take is acceptance. And then I just made up my mind that I was going to do the best I could do in class, hopefully with a couple of classes under my belt, that I would be, you know, considered for a scholarship moving forward to reduce the cost of the tuition. And after giving my best effort, if that doesn't happen and I still continue to pay the full boat for that tuition, so be it, I accept that too. But the minute that I started to accept that reality, what is, not to rage against it, try to change it, be upset about it, the minute that I did that, I just had peace around it.
So the steps that you took were basically acknowledging that there was an issue, that was something that was upsetting and that you didn't like. You took logical, consequential steps intended to bring about an outcome that you'd prefer. And then once you exhausted that opportunity to try to right it or make it go your way, you relaxed and accepted it, which allowed you to have inner peace. Is that about it?
That's totally it. And in the past, I would continue to go with it, and I would continue to tell other people about how unfair this was. And I'm a veteran of the military for 4 years. I was in a war for my country. This is I'd have carried on like all of that, and all that suffering.
Exactly, and that wouldn't have got you what you wanted anyway.
No.
It just would have created more hassle and more anxiety and more rage or inner turmoil, which is not peaceful, and it is suffering.
Absolutely.
You know, I think another thing that people don't realize is that this works with every aspect of your life, even something as terrible as an illness or as a death of a close relative or a friend, because again, there is nothing that you can do that's in your control if it's death, and the things that you can do with respect to improving health can be done. And then once that is out of the picture and you've exhausted that opportunity, then the only thing there is to do is to be as peaceful as possible and let it go.
Absolutely.
But it may take a long time too. I mean, it's not something that happens overnight either. It's something that basically depends on the nature of the difficulty, how important it was to you, and so forth. But the suffering is what we're trying to get at, the ending of your personal suffering. The sooner you can get to the acceptance part, the better you are in terms of avoiding suffering, and the more comfortable you feel with your life.
And what I found is that the faster I can get to the acceptance part, it comes down to just a lot of practice. And fortunately, as human beings, we have ample opportunities for practice all over the place. You're in traffic and you're trying to get somewhere. You know, you're upset, like you're not accepting that this is traffic.
Right.
You know, and that it is indifferent to your urgency to arrive somewhere that you said that you're trying to get to. It's indifferent to it. And as soon as I accept, like, I find myself, being the observer of that thought coming in about how unfair this is, and, why is there traffic today? Aren't these people working? It's 9 a.m. in the morning. Shouldn't everybody be at work? That whole, the world revolves around me. The minute that I can take a step back and just observe those thoughts and not identify with them, I just get this peace, and I almost start smiling. Have you found yourself when you start to accept that something that would get you riled up, your ego, in this crouching tiger position, that you find yourself just smiling at it once you observe it?
Sure. I think that works a lot with people who are in relationships where you have conflict. There's always going to be conflict, and there's always going to be 2 points of view. But accepting the other person's view of what they believe is important in that conflict is as important as advocating for yourself. Remember that when you start finding yourself wanting to stake out a position, that's the ego wanting you to win. The ego wants to be preserved. The ego wants to be superior. And the ego is going to force you to do things that may burn a bridge with somebody else. I'm thinking that maybe the best way where you end suffering in relationship when someone has a different view of you is to apply the same kind of thing. You talk it through. Don't defend. There's nothing to defend. You listen to what their position is. You may or may not feel as though that is a correct analysis of what you've done. But the reality is, the sooner you accept their position, the better it will be. Now, there are ways to work out differences. If it's something of like the big three for couples, I think, are mood matching, being happy and the other person is not, or someone is stressed and the other person is not. Secondly, I think the next big category of conflict is money, and then the third is sex. But all three of those can involve and should involve open communication. And if you get to the standpoint where there's no peace for you, I think we need to take a break, step back, realize what the other person's position is, and still try to advocate what you need to advocate for your own needs, and then accept if it's not there, take action if you need to take action.
Right. Now, what do you say to people that may argue that accepting the situation like it is, or the other person, that what you're essentially doing is saying that they're right, and by you accepting it means you don't care about your position? Yeah,
I would think 2 things apply there. First of all, being right is not important. It's trying to figure out a way that works, that is workable, minimizing the amount of pain for each of the partners in a relationship. So it's not about being right, it's not about prevailing, it's not about being superior, it's not about your way being the way that works. It's trying to figure out a solution. That's one of the problems I think our culture has, is that we tend to blame. We want to look for blame. What's the cause of this problem? Who's at fault? How did we get to this place? You did this, you did that. Oh no, I didn't. I did. You were the one. That's a dead end. That doesn't get you anywhere. The better way, I think, to approach it is to say, this is the issue. Let's see what the possible options are to change it. So that's number one. Number two, I think you have to keep in mind that rightness implies, again, an ego assertion about you. It's better to be, I think, more solicitous of the other person, more kind to the other person, listen carefully. And there's nothing to defend. You don't have to defend anything. Listen and see if there's things that make sense that you can adopt. And hopefully the other person will do the same thing. And then simply let it go if it can't be resolved. Or, again, take action. One last point. We don't want to encourage anyone to just sort of just lay down and accept whatever happens to them. I think the first step is always trying to remedy it or bring it about the best result for everybody. Not just you, but for everybody, the kids, the parents, whatever it is, the people you represent, your neighborhood, the best result for as many as possible. And then if all of it fails and you can't do it, then I think the next step is to try to accept it and deal with it, or take whatever action that's allowed.
Intelligent action.
Intelligent action.
Right.
Not complaining, not judging, not calling your friends and saying what a raw deal you got. That's a dead end, and it just keeps you in suffering, keeps you in that negative emotional state that's harmful to you.
Exactly.
And it wastes present moments.
Completely. Do you know who or what hates acceptance?
Yeah, the ego.
The ego.
Yeah.
The ego hates it.
Yeah.
So that's when you know, when you're sitting there and you have the opportunity, and the ego comes in fast. So your window to observe what's going on and slow it down is so small. That window is so short that you have to practice it so you can extend it just long enough for consciousness to step in to do it. But here is a tip about how to be mindful and catch yourself or catch the moment before ego steps in. Because like I said, it will slip in fast. Is if you feel any kind of inner body resistance, you feel this urge to say something back really quick or defend or explain. If any of that shows up, ego's in the driver's seat. So you want to be super aware of that and bring acceptance to the space first. What you going to say?
I was going to ask you, why isn't it a good idea to defend? What's wrong with defending if you're attacked or if you feel like the other person is wrong? What's wrong with defending? What's the cost? What's the loss?
Well, from my experience, when I defend, it means that I've staked out an adversarial position with the other person. And that at that point, my ego's in charge, and all I'm looking to do is to be superior to them, to have my way win the day. And that's different from the other person being open and them saying, explain to me your point of view. That's completely different, or share with me your point of view. So that typically in these moments doesn't happen. We have gone tone deaf, we can't hear anything else. We only hear ourselves getting the words out as quickly as possible and saying often loudly as possible. And whatever the other person says, we're certainly not open to hearing that. We see their lips moving, but we're not listening. So that's the thing about defending and explaining, is you staked out a position, and the other person has crossed the line and they have become the enemy. And it happens so fast because all the ego wants is to be superior, it wants to survive, and it wants more. It just, that's the way it shows up. It's part of the human condition. The only way to combat it is acceptance. And my practice of it is not defending and not explaining. So when I am talking to someone else and we don't see eye to eye, and I say, hey, listen, are you open to hearing a different viewpoint of that? Or hearing my thoughts on that? And they respond to, nope, I'm not open to it, or yeah, go ahead, but it's in a hostile way. I accept at this point they're not open, and that's okay. And I just share that, like, okay, I don't feel like you're open right now, and that's okay. Perhaps if you are down the road, we can revisit this. But in the meantime, just know that I accept where you're at.
And let me give you another tip that I think works sometimes as well. Again, if somebody is completely closed off and only wants to defend their ego, it's probably not going to work, and you just have to react accordingly. If it turns out that that person is going to be uncooperative and belligerent, then you have a couple of choices to make. Do I continue to try this a softer, gentler way later, or do I just think that this person is someone that I don't want in my life, or that this person can't be useful in helping the problem that you're trying to work out? Here's the tip. You might think of reframing the issue. Reframing the issue. For example, let's suppose that you have a couple, one of whom feels as if not enough time is being spent with him or her. The other one feels that it's just about the right amount, but is reluctant to get any closer. And so the issue has to do with, do I feel loved? Do I feel supported? Do I feel like I'm important in your life, or am I fringe? And so when you start reframing it in terms of, is this an example of something that we truly need to work out, or is this an example of something, one of us feeling as if we're not being loved, and that does need to be worked out? Then the issue is, what kinds of things can we do to improve this?
Right.
And then the other person has the option to say, that's not going to work for me, or it would work for me, or I can't do that, but I can do this. And then that other person, who needs more maybe, would say, okay, let's try that compromise for a while. But my point is that once you put the problem in a framework where it's not tied to ego, it's just about feeling a certain way, or it's wanting to be a little different than what you have it, then both parties can have a say on it. It's like looking at a problem totally devoid of any emotion. You put on the table, and there's no emotion involved in assessing what the problem is, and then you begin to look at what works for each of the people without any ego involvement.
Absolutely. I mean, can you think about if our country and the politics ran on that, to where we all just want to, be treated fairly, have equal opportunity, want our kids to grow up in safe environments and be educated and respectful? If that was the only thing that we were trying to do, would it matter if you were red or blue? Like, it wouldn't matter.
And in fact,
but that's where ego comes in.
In fact, I would say this. We all know red people, we all know blue people, and regardless of what flavor you are, I bet if we took a random sample of 10 people and brought them into the studio here and gave them a problem to work on, just say something like, how much should we pay our employees given these facts? I'll bet you those 10 people could come to a consensus like that.
Absolutely.
Because there's no name calling. There's no this, you're this, and therefore you can't do that, or you're bad, or you never did this, and you don't know any better. All those personal attacks. It's useless, it's worthless. But if you focus on the problem, we're going to pay minimum wage given these facts, or we're not going to pay minimum wage, how can we work out a better deal? You have the problem on the table, you have 10 sets of eyes working on it, and you don't need to go into anything about what your politics are or what your life view is. You're just going to solve the problem.
Absolutely. I love it. So that's our position on acceptance. What would you like to say in closing?
I'd just like to say two things. Acceptance always requires first an attempt to change what you don't like. But you can't be wedded to what your solution is, because that's what the ego wants. You need to be open to the opportunity of looking at other possibilities. Secondly, once you've exhausted all of the things that you can do to try to bring about the best result for what you think you need, and the best result for the other person if there's another involved, then when that's exhausted, the best thing for your heart and your soul and for your inner peace is to let it go and accept it. And that creates an opening for another avenue, for another way of looking at the problem, and it allows it to be reframed in a way that doesn't carry that emotional baggage that is so harmful to us.
And what I'll say will be this: with acceptance, the best solution, whether there is one or whether there isn't one, is to know that it begins with acceptance. Like, that's the first key, and that will produce the best solution. Just because you think the issue is resolved, whether or not it's peaceful, is going to be determined about whether or not acceptance preceded any action that was taken. And if that happened, you increase the likelihood of having a peaceful experience as you enjoy the resolution. The other thing I will say is that you want loving kindness to accompany everything, whether you get the outcome that you prefer or whether you don't. But if you operate with loving kindness toward the other party or toward the situation, that brings peace with it too. And then lastly, what I will say is that some people think that inaction means a loss. It's an L. Not true. Sometimes acceptance means there's no action, and that is powerful. Think about some of the people that we celebrate and in world history, taking a case in point, Mandela. We look at the 27 years that he spent in prison, and when he accepted that this is where I am, I'm choosing to be loving and kind to the people that have imprisoned me, when he accepted that, he got peace. And that's what we celebrate him for more than anything, is that he chose to accept the situation and be peaceful.
And was doubly effective and changed the world after he was released from
Exactly,
prison.
exactly.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Rick, thank you.
Hey, thanks.
I love you, man.
I love you.